In Spiral and Nuis are kicking off a project to develop a blueprint for how to build a New Zealand data commons. And what I want to do in this video is explore the idea, and really from the perspective of where it's come from and what we're trying to achieve. And I'll just introduce a little bit about the program. But the idea here is to introduce this to some of the participants who might be interested in volunteering to help us work through this process and participate in designing a way that New Zealand can have a sort of high value and safe data sharing ecosystem. A lot of people talk about the value of sharing data, and what I want to do here is introduce the idea of economies of scope, which there are economies of scale that are well understood. You know, if you productionize things and build things at a certain volume, then you get economies of scale. You might be able to reduce the price or something. But economies of scope are where, when I add two things together, something new emerges. The scope changes. And a good example in sharing data is, you know, if you know my weight, say I weigh 90 kg, and that's all you know, and some other person knows my height, you know, so 5'9". If they know those individually, they know a bit of information about me. But if they know if one person knows both of those things about me, they might be able to tell whether I'm overweight, you know, and the height in relation to my weight. Provides new information that didn't exist before, where you just had the two pieces of data separate. So, and there's two concepts here. One is sharing data, so I can share my data with somebody. But that example that I just showed you is where we integrate data, where the data gets not only shared with somebody, but two different pieces of data get integrated together. And that's when you get these economies of scope. And I'm going to use an example to share with you to illustrate that idea. So I've got a person here in red, that's you, and you go out and you buy an iWatch or an Apple Watch, which has got your heart rate monitor in it. And that's pretty cool. You can do your steps up the stairs and see what happens to your heart rate, and you can use that to monitor your steps per day and that sort of thing. And it's a great little sensing device. But wouldn't it be cool if you could then share that same data? That data could automatically be uploaded to your fitness instructor, with your consent, of course, and they could be monitoring your daily activity as well. And so, you know, that might provide some extra incentive to do a bit each day to get fitter. And imagine still further if you could share that information with your medical record. Now, I know Nokia has a prize at the moment for predicting strokes, based on crowdsourcing a lot of data and that. So there may be potential in the future where if you can share your data about your heart rate with your doctor, there might be uses in that. And of course, Samsung and various others are doing blood sugar readers and that. So personal health sensing that can be used is valuable for you, but what if it could be integrated into a GP's practice, and there could be apps and things which allow your GP to share that data when you consent to do that with them. And what about heart researchers who test your blood sugars and various other things, and your cholesterol levels and that, to sort of do research? Wouldn't it be valuable for them if they also had your heart rate as well? And genomics researchers, if they're understanding genomes and, I don't know, heart disease, wouldn't it be useful for them if they'd got your genome to also be able to share your heart rate as well? And I got approached by Comvita. I've got a research budget. They're interested in Manuka honey's effects on diabetes and blood sugars, and so it'd be quite useful if we started to get a much better picture of what this kind of supplement you were having, so that they could evaluate whether their supplement was making much of a difference. If they could share all of this information with your GP, fitness instructor, your genomics, and your heart monitor. Indeed, there's a company in New Zealand called Loyalty New Zealand. You have a Flybuys card. They've got data on your purchases from over 70 New Zealand companies. It'd be pretty interesting information if you could share what you purchase at the supermarket, the kind of food you're eating, with your GP, with your heart rate, with your supplements and your genomics, and your exercise regime. You can start to see the value of getting a fuller picture of what's going on for yourself, So there's a lot of personal value in enabling a little data sharing ecosystem which suits and provides high value for you if you can integrate that data and use it to get a fuller picture of how your diet and your fitness and your heart and everything and genome are all working together, and then you could actually use that data with your GP. The real value comes, though, of course, if that's just you, that's one thing, but the real value, of course, comes when we then share that with 3 million other people around the world and start to understand the patterns of diet, fitness, heart rate, medical records, fitness levels, genomics, and with that kind of data you get a common value from the rest of everybody else. If they share the same kind of data with you, you'll get the value of that as researchers discover ways to, predict heart attacks or strokes or find better regimes for the kind of person you are. Given that you're 5'9" and weigh a certain amount, what's the best thing to do with someone like you? Because in 3 million other people, there's bound to be a good few hundred who are almost exactly like yourself, and what's happening with them, and how do we predict health outcomes or manage health outcomes. So you can see when you can add data together, individual data about yourself, but then add it to the commons, you get personal value back. You get personal value about your own health vis-a-vis the health of everybody else and how your health compares with theirs, and we can learn off that. You can kind of do big science with big data. But I guess here's the rub too. So you might want to share it with these people, but there might be people you don't want to share it with. You might not want to share it with your insurance company. You might not want to share it with the government. You might not want to share it with your ex-spouse or your boss, or anybody else. You might not want them to know your personal details, and so we're in a bit of a dilemma. There's a huge value to you in having access to all of your data and being able to integrate it in one place, and then drive value for yourself in it, and also you're contributing to community value. But how do we do that in a way which is safe and in your control? And that, I guess, is really the nub of the question here. How can we create an ecosystem which allows this kind of thing to happen? And so the shared value here, the entrepreneurs who made the Apple iWatch, they get value because they get a much better service than someone who doesn't link into the commons, because someone who doesn't link into the commons can't have their watch link into your GP. There's value for the health supplement providers, for a whole range of, for researchers, for yourself as well, and for the community if we can share data, but only if we can really do it safely in a high trust environment. And that's the problem that we're trying to address. So, other people have noticed the value of big data. It's no surprise that the private sector's busy wanting to do this. You'll hear about Apple Health Kits, and Google's probably asked you for your email address, and they probably want your cell phone number as well, because what they're doing is they're integrating data from a number of sources. Busy sitting here getting your cell phone data, you've got your email data, all of your purchases, your YouTube, what you watch on YouTube, and they're collecting all this data. Now, what you notice about this network is that Google's in the middle here, and you're sort of here, and what you get for that is the various services that you get, but they're integrating your data for themselves because they're then selling it off to marketing companies so that they can make some money off it. And so you're not getting the value of your shared and integrated data, they're getting the value of your shared and integrated data. What they're giving you in return for that is an email service or some YouTube and that. And again, usually the consent is pretty wide-ranging and out of your control, and it's very hard to get your data back. And of course, this is happening with Facebook and a number of other companies are all making what they call a big data play. I got offered a job by a well-known New Zealand internet company who wanted to offer me a job because they want to make a data play. They've seen that the Australians, Coles Myer, the supermarkets, the network companies and the banks are joining up their data to on-sell that data to make money, monetize their data asset. And I got offered a job in this company to help them do the same thing, which I turned down. But again, a lot of these companies are seeing a lot of value in owning data or leveraging the data assets that they've got. There are other companies who are like Loyalty New Zealand, the Flybuys, who they've got data from 70 different New Zealand companies, and when you sign up to Flybuys, you've signed up for permission for them to share all that company with your chemist. So you can see I'm buying antidepressants over here, I'm buying bagels at the shop, and I'm filling up my car. It's a RAV4, 60 litres. I've got the LTSA data and a bunch of other data, so they can profile that, and then they can sell it to marketing teams to try and sell you things. Yeah, and then they'll give you a few Flybuys points in return for that. So they're not sharing the value of that data with you. They're integrating it to understand it and analyse you so that they can sell you stuff. The government's doing the same thing. The government's making a data play. The superhighway that they're developing is allowing them to become the nexus where they can share, Bernardo's data with, Salvation Army data with Mum and Dad NGO data, with Ministry of Health data, with SIFS data, with your tax data, so that they can understand you and in some cases provide you with a better service, in other cases hunt you down and take your kids off you. In other cases, obviously there's policing as well. So there's some coercive uses and some less coercive uses. The point here is they're becoming very knowledgeable about you and your profile for their own benefit of investing in social services and public services and that kind of thing. And there's value to all of us in them doing that. We can find the baddies, we can get better services, but of course there's also a risk. And you'll notice the thing about all these networks is that you're kind of out here using services, and you probably don't have a lot of choice about a lot of those services, and when you use those services, you've signed up for them to use your data to monetize it and take the value for themselves. So it's fundamentally kind of extractive, and what the big integrations that's going on at the moment with data is to monetize it to make value for the owners, the shareholders of those companies, whether it's the government or the Google or Facebook or Loyalty New Zealand. You've got Apple over here doing the same thing, and Samsung's doing the same thing. They're all trying to make a data play to gather data on you that they can use in marketing. So it's fundamentally extractive. They're extracting value from the business of integrating your data for their own purposes, and it's hierarchically controlled. And I noticed this particularly in government when I was working at Treasury on integrating data. I got rung by the CEO of a hospital in Auckland who was saying, "Oh, gee, I'd like to have access to that data too, and can't I get access because I think I can do a better service than the local DHB, because I think I can do better rehabilitation service and that'll save the government a lot of money." And I had to say to them, "No, sorry, you can't do that because you're not allowed access to the data." And then when I was over in the Ministry of Education, when I was talking to education entrepreneurs who've got these tech applications, which things like Duolingo and the Khan Academy, and there's a bunch of local New Zealand providers who are using analytics to understand, reading and do reading offers and things that teachers want to use and students want to use. But these entrepreneurs want to integrate that with the education data so they can see what the effect is on NCEA results. But they were told no, because that wasn't part of what the Ministry of Education was planning to do at that time. So the data is controlled. Your data is controlled by the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Health, and others. And who can use it becomes a feature of who's in control and what their risk tolerance is, what their objective is, whether they like your particular idea or not. So one thing about these hierarchical approaches is that they stifle innovation if they're too tightly controlled. The other feature of this, of course, is that you end up fragmenting your data. I don't know how many of you take photos on your iPhone, but some of that's stored on Apple, some of it's stored on Google Drive, and some of it's stored at somewhere else. It's the same with health data, right? Apple's going to own some of your health data. The government owns some of your health data. If those guys are competing with each other, if Google and Facebook are competing with each other, then your data is going to end up fragmented and all over the place and unable to be integrated because there's commercial interests who want to monopolize and own data. So the current model for integrating data is an ownership model where the person who owns the most data wins because they've got the biggest monopoly on understanding you and they can sell it for a premium. The Problem is, of course, in some cases like government, they're not very good at innovation because they're not very open to sharing it, because they're all risk averse or want to keep control themselves. In other cases like Android and Google and Facebook, they might be more open and innovative, but not with each other. They're fragmenting the ownership of that data and then on selling it to people without your consent, really. So anyway, this is all going on, and I've been at the table in government thinking about integrating government data for the purposes of improving services and outcomes and that. But worries start to emerge of the risks of doing that. When I was in the Data Futures Forum in 2013, we were looking at the question of the balance of value and risk in data sharing and how New Zealand could create a data ecosystem that allowed more sharing but also managed risk better. People often see gathering value from data by data sharing, or they see the risks of doing so, and they see these in opposition to each other. And if I'm going to extract value, I have to sort of I can grab data, and people see these as sort of a either or. Some people are on the risk camp and some people are on the value side. Oh, let's share all the data we can because there's huge value in it. And other people going, oh God, let's share no data, or let's pick up the silos because it's too much risk. And we were examining that question, and our first document looked at that quite closely. What we came up with was a set of principles for a healthy data sharing ecosystem, because what happens, we asked ourselves the question, what would a safe and high value data sharing ecosystem look like? And we come up with these principles of value, inclusion, and trust and control. By that we mean a good data sharing ecosystem is high value to the participants. It's inclusive, so more people share more stuff and more people are allowed to participate in that data sharing. It's also high trust, so people feel safe to share their information in the same place, and it's inside their control. We had a bit of a debate actually about whether it needed to be in their control or whether we should have privacy there, and I argued for control because sometimes you want to be private, sometimes you don't. What you actually want is control over whether you want to be private or not. So control is a much bigger overriding of the principle behind a good, safe data sharing ecosystem. And what you find, and I've drawn them in opposition like this, is that if you think about it, trust and control as principles are really trying to address this risk question. And value and inclusion, inclusion is an additional feature of value. The more inclusive you are, the more economies of scope you get, the more high value it is. The more people who can use it, the more people who get value from it. Now what you find actually is there's a system dynamic here where if you have a high degree of trust and control, you're more likely to share data to receive the value from it. And if you're getting lots of value from data, then you're more likely to build up your risk tolerance to actually take a punt and share more of it. So this is a positive feedback loop. Where there is a data ecosystem which is in your control and high trust, you're more likely to integrate and share and be included in it, and include yourself in it, and get more value from it. And when you get more value, you're more likely to take risks because you know there's value involved. And the thing about that is it can either spiral upwards, where you get more data sharing and higher trust and higher inclusion, or it spirals downwards, right? Where if you erode trust and control, then people are less likely to want to share. They go undercover, use multiple identities, and try and evade people integrating their data. So there's less value in the data, and when there's less value, you don't see the benefit of sharing it. So your trust in wanting to do it diminishes as well. So you can either sort of be negatively orientated or positively orientated. And what we're aiming for is an ecosystem which has got these principles. So it's high value for everybody, it's inclusive, it's in your control, and it's high trust, so that it spirals upwards. use of data coercively spirals this downwards. The more people try and grab your data and use it against you to market you or do coercive government services on you, the less likely you want to share with them. And so the data system, the data ecosystem that we're aiming for is this one here. We found out a second thing. We found out, we also made another sort of leap. And the leap here is from a sort of a data of ownership and a data of kinds, where what you manage is the kind of data that you've got, and what the value you get is ownership of data, and what you manage is ownership to a data management of use. So what that means, and here's a good way of sort of explaining that. There's 4 ways you can use shared data. You can use data personally, or you can use it impersonally, right? You can anonymize it and use it not to find an individual person, but use it to understand, do some science or do some research or public policy or measure something. But it's not about the person itself. You're using their data, but you're not using it to target them. But then sometimes you can use data to personally target individuals, right? The second distinction to make is whether you've asked for consent or not, whether they would like it or not, and there's value to them in it or not. So, of course, the NSA and police and GCSB cases of where they want to get your personal data and they want to use it coercively, or SIFS does this, Child, Youth and Family. They want to share and integrate data because they want to catch baddies. They're not going to ask those baddies for consent. They're going to share the data without your consent because they want to personally target people. And Facebook and Google are the same, right? They want to join up all that data, not really with your consent, so that they can target things to you, and they own that data and they can forward it on to sell it to whoever they want. So there are coercive uses of personalized uses of data, which is coercive. There's also coercively harvested non-personal uses of data. So we might give all of the telecom phone record data to the government so they can understand traffic profiles, but they're not using it to individually target you for speeding. They're using it to understand how to build better roads, for example. So that's in that situation. The idea here is that you're gathering a lot of data, and it's personal data, personalized data, or it's travel data, or whatever it is. It's not being used personally. The thing is, a lot of people make a distinction between personal data, like your height and your weight, and whether you've got a disease or not, versus non-personal data, like your geospatial location. But when you have a use framework, that doesn't make sense, because if you can use my cell phone data to track where I go, which tells you lots of other stuff about me, and the lens has on the web, you can find out what my house value is worth, whether I'm in a high wind area and that sort of thing. Some sort of non-personal data can be used, which might affect you personally. So the better way to understand it is to understand data in terms of the way it's used. And I think that's a valuable framework because it allows us to think about ways of managing data which help us to build rules around use rather than rules around sort of ownership and copying and that sort of thing. It's use that actually matters and affects people. On this side, of course, so this is a coercive side where really you're nabbing the data from people. And some people like Google are straddling the middle here. They're asking for consent, but it's not really consent. But then you can have genuine consent. And if we look at non-personal use of data and individual consent, a great example of that is science, right? When they ask you to fill in a consent form so that they can do some research on you at the hospital or something. It's consent-based sharing of your personal data, but it's for non-personal use. Not actually doing it to target you with a new drug. They just want to try out the drug on you so they can understand how it works for lots of other people. So consent-based access to shared personal data is quite often done in science. And then there's personalized uses of that. So I consent to giving my data to somebody if I'm going to get some personal value back from it. So it's hard to think of a good example, actually. Xero is a good example. Xero is a New Zealand accounting package where what you can do is you consent to get your bank records pumped into Xero, and you can consent to feed that out to your accountant, and you're in control of where that data goes. So your banking data, and it's used to to fill in your tax records, and you can send it out to your bookkeeper or your employees. So Xero is a personal information management system which allows you to consent to sharing data amongst people, but it stays in your control, right? And it's for your individual benefit that data is being shared. Okay, now hold that thought, because there's a bunch of other stuff. Oops. So far we've talked about the fact that there's high value in sharing data, but there's a bit of a land grab going on, which is going to fragment your data and is coercively using your data. It's kind of not inclusive or outside your control. We talked about the New Zealand Data Futures Forum saying, well, a good ecosystem is where it is in your control and where you don't mind sharing it because it's high trust and high control, and it's inclusive so that we get a lot of value from the data, but it's done safely. And the trouble with that work was it never really went anywhere after the principles. So what do you do? How do you actually build a data ecosystem that does have those principles at its heart? And once we wound up the Futures Forum, I was offered some work by the Productivity Commission to look at social sector data sharing. And when doing that, I started looking at a couple of other things. And this is where I came up with the idea of having a data commons, where there's a commons-based approach to sharing data, which would meet those principles. Have a look at this. You know all these companies. You've got Trade Me here in New Zealand, and Amazon, and Netflix and Uber and all those. There's a bunch of stuff going on in the tech sector, and it looks all like the same kind of thing. It's disintermediating people, and it's linking people up and linking data up and all that kind of thing. But I usually draw a line down here, which goes something like this. I usually draw a line that sort of goes kind of like that, because I notice there's two kind of things going on. If you notice, MyWave is a personal information management system which drives value for MyWave by providing a hub where you can share data and with supermarkets and that. Uber is the center of a network of taxi drivers and that who so they're disintermediating all the other taxi companies by being able to work at scale now in ways which were simply impossible before. So they can control the whole world of taxis by having direct relationship with every taxi driver and not having to have any offices and contact centers because they're using the phones to do it. So all that networking is allowing them to scale up bigger than they were before. Same with Amazon, right? There used to be sort of, different book companies who had relationships with writers and customers, and here's another book company. Well, what Amazon's done is come along and gone, sorry buddy, you got a bad business model. I'm going to be much more efficient than you because I'm going to use the internet to get access to individual customers and publishers and manage a much bigger business than you. Trade Me's done the same thing. It's disintermediated a lot of local auction shops like Turner's and places like that because they've used the internet to scale up and disintermediate those guys so that they've taken over. eBay, yeah, they're all doing the same kind of things. But those are fundamentally the same business model that used to be there. There's a bunch of shareholders who own the company at the center, who are gathering all of the value and data and profit from disintermediating by using the network to become a bigger brother, if you like. Government's kind of doing that at the same time. Now, by contrast, and I don't know if Xero goes on this side or that side actually, by contrast, there's a whole bunch of peer-to-peer kind of solutions. There's new management styles. Morningstar is $1 billion tomato canning company, but there's no, everybody's a manager. There's no hierarchy. It's pancake flat, right? It's a peer-to-peer organization where everybody can talk to anyone they want. There's no bosses, or everyone's the boss. The janitor can write a $3 million check, and it's outperformed every other tomato canning company. Bitcoin's the same thing. It's a protocol-based approach where in the past financial transactions needed a bank to go through, so the banks were these centralizing hubs, and they handled all the money and they took their profit off and extracted value from it, the old model. Now Bitcoin's peer-to-peer, deeply peer-to-peer protocol, which just allows the whole internet to do what they like based on the protocol, to peer-to-peer transfer data without anyone extracting value and controlling the whole network in the way that big banks do. And GitHub, there's a hierarchical way of building software where you get some program managers in control and says you do that, you do that, you do that. Or you can do GitHub, which is totally peer-to-peer, where there's a protocol-based approach where you can make a push request or a pull request, and everyone can talk to everybody and work on any bit they like. And it's a commons-based approach to sort of driving value. Interestingly, most of the open source data that gets created by places like GitHub is now the foundation for most of the servers in big companies like IBM and that. So the open source community is doing a much better job by peer-to-peer collaboratively building something than a hierarchical organizational approach. And there's other, the internet itself and open markets. They are open peer-to-peer networks, right? So we have to ask ourselves, there's these two kinds of things happening with the business of, because of the internet and networking and data sharing and that sort of stuff, and wireless sensing and cell phones and things. Everything's being disrupted, but it's being disrupted in two kinds of ways. One, the big hierarchical networks are getting bigger and more controlling, and disintermediating taxi drivers and auction houses and book retailers, and basically making the market smaller. The diversity is smaller because they're centralizing more. Or there's these peer-to-peer networks that are competing with them and doing things in a much more collaborative kind of way. And I guess I started thinking about this kind of difference in what's happening with the innovation at the moment, and started thinking, well, where does data sit in here? Is data going to end up like that or like that? And I think we have two options for the future with data. It can either be highly centralized and controlled by individuals who extract value and who don't have much interest in the needs of the community of people who are doing it, because they have a monopoly and they are a monopoly and they don't really need to listen. And so that's not a very high trust model, nor is it inclusive. If somebody else wants to do something, they have to go through this person first before they can get to these people. And of course this guy extracts money or says, nah, I don't like you, you're a competitor. And so this kind of model stifles innovation. It can be highly coercive, and if government data sharing ends up in this space, then I think we're all in trouble. And it's the same with if some of those big offshore companies end up with all of your health data or your education data. You're going to end up with a lot of monopolies, which are slowly then going to get aggregated together into other monopolies in a race to the top, where most of your data is owned by one or two big players, and you have very little control over what's done with it, because you have very little voice. The alternative is to build, I guess, what I'm calling a common style approach to data sharing, where the interests of all of the participants in the community are owned by the community, and where those interests are reflected in the rules and ability of the community itself to share the value that the community generates. In this case, this person's extracting value from the community. In this case, different participants can all share in the value of the community. And that's, I guess, what a commons is, really. It's saying that the commons is governed by the people who are using the thing that's in common and have a shared interest in managing it well. And in our case, when the commons is data, you don't get a tragedy of the commons where everyone chews up the commons and races to the bottom and fishes out all the fish stocks. You actually get a tragedy of the non-commons. When data is not in common, it fragments. Different people have different bits of data, but when it's in common, the marginal cost of copying data and reusing it is nothing. So value can be shared across everybody. And the question, I guess, comes back to how can we manage a commons-based approach to data sharing, which is also safe and builds control and trust and inclusion into the commons. The final piece of the puzzle was starting to see these other things merging. There's about 50 PIMs around the world, personal information management systems. MyWave in Christchurch is a good example of one that's won some awards overseas. This is a business where they want to make money by being the central hub where your bank data, your airline data, your restaurant data, your food data, your pet data, your fitness data, family data, health data, things data, possessions data, money data, friends data, brands data, all get centralized by them, and they give you more control over it. And so you can personally manage who's allowed access to that data, who's not allowed access to it. And these PIMs, these third parties, are starting to emerge where they're saying, I'm going to be a safe harbor, James, where if you want to share your data with me, I'll make sure that you get some control over it, so that we both get some value from it, and it's not just extracted from you and out of your control. And so that when the supermarket or the airline wants to use it to market something to you, they've kind of got to ask your permission. And that's a very different model to, say, Loyalty New Zealand and Flybuys, where they just get you to sign a waiver that says, give me all your data and I'll use it for anything. And you get no further control over it on what they can use it for. So people are starting to build these ways of you having more control over your data. So it's quite interesting, isn't it? They're starting to understand that people don't want to just give their data, want to manage their digital lives, so that they can extract value from them. Xero is another good example too. Xero is where you link your bank data with your accountant and your tax data. We're just about to sign something with the IRD. Xero is so that they can link up with tax data so that it's very easy to do your tax. But Xero, again, is a data play, right? But it's an interesting data play because they're creating an open ecosystem which is in your control. You're the one who has to say, yes, my bank can upload my data here, or no, I want to get rid of that and you can't do that anymore. And yes, my accountant can upload and see my data. So you're in control of it. Interestingly, Xero also allows third-party providers who must get your consent to use things like the farming accounting app. So you pay some money for the farming app, which also hooks into Xero, such that if, I don't know, farming accounting might be special or something, or consulting accounting or legal accounting. All of these innovators out here are using the Xero ecosystem to also access your bank data, but with your consent, right? You say, I'm going to buy that app, okay, I'm going to play by the rules that Xero's got, go out, use this app, and then they get to access all the stuff. That gives me some extra value, and Xero is my safe harbor for managing my financial transaction data. So, when I was in the Data Futures Forum, I talked with Alex Pentland from MIT, who's, I think he's one of the top 10 most influential thinkers in the world. It was interesting talking to him. And he said, we need to understand what's happening in the biggest scheme of things. There was a time when financial data and the financial system was a bit of a nightmare. It wasn't very well regulated. There were all sorts of shysters and people who were trying to take your money off you. And over time, that got more regulated and got more trustworthy, and then there came banks who, had regulations so that you could be more confident putting your money in there. And so these third-party intermediaries, high-trust intermediaries, became places where it was a safe place to do money transactions. And he thinks the same thing's going to happen with data, that it's the Wild West at the moment. Everyone's making a land grab for all of your data, but over time people are going to realize they want to manage their own data, they want to manage their digital lives, they want to have some control over who they share it with, and over their identity and that kind of stuff, so that these third-party providers are going to start to pop up and provide these kinds of solutions for people. One thing to note about these solutions, of course, is the main people extracting value from them are still Xero and MyWave, So you've got personal information management systems emerging, third-party providers who are offering you a bit more control over your data sharing ecosystem. You've got this big land grab going on by people who want to be controlling and coercive. It's kind of happening at the same time. We have a bunch of principles which we think, value, inclusion, trust, and control, which we think would make a high value ecosystem, because if you got a lot of value and it was high trust, you'd be more willing to share your data, and if it was in your control, you'd be more willing to share your data. If more people could share data, you could have a whole ecosystem of innovators and data sharing going on in an ecosystem where you felt some high confidence that you could manage who was using your data and what they were using it for. And these innovators and NGOs and whoever was bioscientists could be using greater access to data for value for them and for you and for the community, where they had access to that data. So we got the idea that we need an ecosystem, and we've got some principles on how to build it. We know what we're building it in opposition to some extent. There is this tantalizing idea that we can have these third-party kind of personal information management systems. But my question really is, how do we take those data futures forum principles and put them into practice? How do you actually build a data ecosystem that is high value, inclusive, high trust, and in your control, and allows entrepreneurial activity, science activity, sharing data for personal value, and inclusivity, where iwi, entrepreneurs, outside thinkers can all get involved without going through this guy here saying, no, I don't like that idea, I don't like acupuncture, I'm not going to let you use that, or I don't like you collecting mould data in South Auckland because it's going to affect the government. So how do we do that? And that's really what this project is about. We want to kind of answer this question: how do you build a data sharing ecosystem that is high value, in your control, is high value for the participants of the data sharing ecosystem itself, and is high trust? And I think we're going to approach it with 4 big areas. We want to understand the market. What are the incentive structures to move people from a sort of a model where ownership of data is the most value, to incentives where use of data is the most value, and having your data fragmented and in your control but not sharing it is less value than actually sharing it in an ecosystem which can give you back some value but encourages you to share it. So there's a bunch of questions in that space about that we need to sort of dig into to understand how we can move from a model of ownership to shared value and shared use. There's a bunch of business questions. What kind of business model, what kind of sanctions, rules, ethics, practice will support an inclusive and in control and high trust and high value data sharing ecosystem? Do we end up giving this to the Stats NZ and say, hey, they're a high trust crown entity that are not controlled by the government? Is that a nice place? Or banks are high trust intermediaries, maybe with that. Or do we need to build a commons? And what does a commons mean, and what does it look like, and what are the rules of engagement that you need to think of when you're trying to achieve inclusivity, control, trust, and value? There's a bunch of other questions around technology. I've been talking to a bunch of people about the use of things like the blockchain and cryptography to do things like track the provenance of data and give people control. So you might give someone access to your data, but that control expires after a certain amount of time. So there's all sorts of cool technology coming online. And can we use that to build a data sharing ecosystem which has the properties that it's inclusive and in your control and high trust, but also, inclusive meaning it's low cost. Are we going to build a big data sharing hub that costs millions of dollars, or how does a small mum and dad pest eradication program get access to that, and how can technology enable that? And then we're going to look at some case studies. There's case studies which have sort of personal aspects to them, like health data commons and social commons. There's others that have commercial questions. How do we deal with commercial sensitivity? Or science questions. How do we deal with the fact that I've collected some data, it's high value to me because I can publish, and in a publish and perishable environment, I don't want to share that with everybody straight away. So we need to understand the real world, and which can inform our questions around technology. Genomes are really large, they're terabytes big. It'll inform our sort of operating model and inform our market. How big is that market for sort of a health data commons? Is it self-funding? So we want to get a team of people in New Zealand to really dig into these questions. And then once we've had a good examination of those questions, we'd really like to understand and bring that all that learning back together to start to sort of examine some real options, some practical options to sort of turn that, in principle, kind of discussion around, yes, we should be inclusive and in control and high value and high trust, into a practical set of recommendations about how you might do that. And the deliverables really, we'll come out with a blueprint which will have some options. Hey, if you're going to do this, you need this kind of ownership model. Here's your 3 options for an ownership model. Here's the kind of consenting things that you need to think about if you're going to be a high trust and inclusive and in control data ecosystem. But we also want to build the network. That's why really I want people to get involved, because I think this is big, way bigger than one person. And if we can get the technologists in the same room as the people with the case studies, as the people who know lots about business ownership and networks, like people like Inspiral, who have these weird ownership models that are peer-to-peer, and then we get economists and other people who understand incentives to think together, I think we'll come up with something pretty cool. But the network will be left over as well, and that network can apply, obviously, its thinking elsewhere along with the blueprint. I'm also kind of hoping that if we come up with a point where we've got some realistic options that we might pursue, that some of our partners from our case studies or other partners might want to come in, and we can extract a team from this network to actually go and do some prototypes, some actual prototypes. So maybe we join up with a bank and a bioheritage science challenge and some philanthropists and the pest eradication volunteer community and build a prototype. Or the Ministry of Health plus Comvita plus Orion Health plus a whole bunch of health entrepreneurs get together and say, let's try and establish the rules of the road for sharing health data in New Zealand and try and meet those blueprint objectives. So that's really what we're trying to do. And this will be freely available to everyone so that they can apply it to their own Catalyst projects and other projects. Maybe even Trade Me Loyalty New Zealand and some of those other people making data plays might rethink whether they want to make that an ownership kind of model, ownership monopoly kind of data play, or whether they want to become part of the commons and the kind of value that they'll get from that. So that's all really. This is just an introduction to some of the thinking behind why we want to explore how you would build a data commons, or really how you would build a data ecosystem in New Zealand that was high value and low risk, and really incentivise sharing, not ownership. and did that in a way where the value from doing that could be shared amongst the participants, the entrepreneurs, the researchers, the schools, the teachers, the GPs, the pest eradication volunteers, the doc, the kind of people who want their data shared so they can get extra value from it. And I hope you can join us.